Good morning, Ward Davis here. Got on Chat GPT last night and asked it, what's something I could be doing that I'm not doing. Today, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to talk about a song. I figure like a good one to start with is the song that I wrote with Cody Jinks called "I'm Not the Devil." No, I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to do 15 Years in a 10-Year Town. 15 Years in a 10-Year Town is a song that I wrote with Pat Alger. Pat is he's a songwriting hero of mine. I grew up, I learned how to play piano listening to Garth Brooks records. The dance was kind of like the trick I always kept in my hat, the piano lick at the beginning. But Pat didn't write the dance. Tony Arata wrote the dance, but Pat he co-wrote the Thunder Rolls. He co-wrote Unanswered Prayers. He co-wrote What She's Doing Now that summer. And he also wrote Small Town Saturday Night. It's a big anthem for Hal Ketchum, everybody knows. But man, Pat's a great dear friend of mine. And I used to go down to this bar called Dan McGinnis down on Music Row. Every day there was this group of songwriters and music guys. Ralph Murphy was one, rest his soul. Pat Alger, Bob Regan would pop in fairly often. Oh man, Waylon Holyfield too. He used to come in there just every so often. But Tony Arata, who wrote the dance, and Paul Lux, who is this great legendary record executive, and they used to give him shit because he dropped Johnny Cash from his label. But anyway, Paul's a great guy. I asked him about it, and Paul said, I said, "Did you seriously drop Johnny Cash from your record label?" And he looks at me and he goes, "I had a very hard conversation with Johnny Cash." But anyway, so I used to hang out with those guys and listen to their stories. And one day Pat said, "Hey, you and I should write a song." And I said, "Sure." And so I think we wrote a couple. But one particular day, I was getting pretty disheartened with the music industry. It was, I remember the dates here. 2014 was, oh yeah, by the way, I'm not reading anything. I look around and shit. So, November, it was November of 2014. We started a song. It was on a Thursday. It might have been a Wednesday. I can't remember, but he and I met at his office. He and Ralph Murphy had a office down there. You should Google Ralph too. He wrote a lot of songs and just was a beautiful, beautiful man. But anyway, we started this song, 15 Years in a 10-Year Town. And man, it was like I'm running out of places to hide, running out of money to buy smoke and jack and coke to fix my nerves. I was really, really depressed. Running out of bridges to burn, man. I was coming to the end of my road with my, having publishers and having a representation on Music Row. So, right with Pat he never had a publisher. He was self-published, so he owned all his Garth Brooks hits, bastard. But anyway, he and I, we were down at his office. We wrote the first half of 15 Years in a 10-Year Town. And it is what it is. It's very... And we might have wrote some remnants of a second verse. I think we even might have tried to bring a woman into it, but it didn't work. Women didn't work right there. We started writing it on a Wednesday or a Thursday. On Friday, I found out I had a song in the stack for Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard. Buddy was cutting a record on them down in Austin. And I found out that I had a song, Unfair Weather Friend, that Marla Cannon and I had written. And so I sent Marla a reminder of that song because I knew that her dad liked it and he was producing the record. And so, and he's really hard on her. I thought he was hard on me, and Marla's like, "No, he's hard on me." That might have been the first song of hers he ever cut. If not, it was the second. Marla's a fantastic songwriter, by the way. She wrote 10 Rounds with Jose Cuervo and Cleaning My Gun and The Fool, Leanne Womack, The Fool. I'm the fool. Anyway. I found out that on a Friday that it was in the stack for Willie and Merle's record. And then on Monday, it happened. They actually recorded it that Monday afternoon and evening. And I saw a video on my phone and heard Willie Nelson singing my song. Man, it was just the greatest, still probably the greatest moment of my career. And I was booked to finish writing that song with Pat the next day, literally the next day. And I couldn't wait because here I was writing this song with, one of my songwriting heroes, definitely somebody I had those piano books, the Garth Brooks piano books. I actually got Pat to sign one. It's downstairs from when I was a kid. Anyway, I went down there and sat down and I said, "Hey, Pat, I got a cut yesterday." And he said, "Oh yeah, what kind of cut you get?" I says, no big deal. Just Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard. Pat said, "Oh, cool. Hey, this song we started last week, it's really good." And dude, at the moment, I've forgotten whatever song we had started last week. I went from being the most depressed guy on the planet to being feeling better in all those 15 years. At the time, it was still 14 years. I came up with the hook in anticipation of 15 years. So when I got the text about Willie recording my song, and then Marla called me and we cried on the phone together, my first call after that was to my friend Keith Wallace back home in Arkansas. And Keith is my old drinking buddy, man. We went to high school together and he used to ride horses when we were kids. And Wallace is arguably the biggest Willie Nelson fan on the planet. As opposed to calling my dad or calling my mom or calling my grandma or calling anybody. Also, Mama didn't care for Willie Nelson, so she wouldn't have been impressed. But I called Wallace and I said, "Man, remember where you're standing right now, because right now Willie Nelson is singing a song that I wrote." And we had that moment. Anyway, that second verse is literally, I'm running out of friends I can call. By now they've heard it all for too damn long. They told me I've told them I'm breaking in. I wasn't. That day I did, by God. And that happening was the thing that made me go, you know what? I'm going to cut a record. I'm going to do my own record. I don't have anything else to prove. And so I did, and I recorded that record, and I called it 15 Years in a 10-Year Town because of it, man. It was, that town did kick my ass. It goes a little bit further. I'll give you a little add-on to it. The day the CDs were printed, I took a stack of them down to Dan McGinnis because, the title track being 15 Years in a 10-Year Town, I wanted Pat to have some copies. Maybe he'd give one to Garth. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe Garth liked one of the songs and cut one. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows how those things work? I'm just kidding. I just wanted to take him some CDs. But me and my buddy Greg Jones, a lot of people know him as Brother Greg, but he'll always be Greg Jones to me. He and I went down and picked the CDs up, and then we went down to Dan McGinnis, and we were sitting down there. And Greg wasn't a regular at Dan McGinnis. I was. He would come in from time to time, but we sat in the corner of the bar where Pat and all those guys would sit, and they had their spot at the bar, like Norm and Cliff and Cheers, like Pat and Tony and Paul and all of them, Ralph. They all had their spots. I'm sitting in a spot. If there were people sitting in their area when they came in, they wouldn't go to their area. They would sit on the other side and wait for the people to get up and then go grab their seats real quick. So I'm sitting there, and Greg says to me, "Hey man, Tony's sitting across the bar." And I looked, and I was in a spot. There was a post in between me and Tony Arata, by the way, who wrote The Dance. And if you go on the internet there, you'll find there's a video of me in the 5th grade playing The Dance at my 5th grade band concert that my 5th grade band teacher, Mr. Ferguson, posted. Anyway, I peek around the corner and I say, "Hey, Pat," or "Hey, Tony, hey, man, come on down. We're just waiting on you guys. We're holding your seats." And Greg and I scooted down a seat, and Tony came and sat down where he sits. And he said, "What you got there?" And I said, "Oh, man, it's just my new record." I slid one across the bar to him, down the bar to him. He was sitting there, and there was like a corner, and he was sitting here, and I was sitting here. We can't tell. Tony, he looked at it, and it still had the cellophane on it, and he looked at it and then slid it back and said, "Cool." It didn't have any of the songs on the outside of it. And he slid it back, and I slid it back to him. I said, "No, man, keep it, man. I got a whole stack here for Pat. He'll be fine." And he said, "Oh, cool." And so he opened it up, and he like unfolded it, and he's sitting there at the bar, and he's like looking at it, and he leans back, and he closes it, and he sets it down and pushes it, and he goes, "You wrote Unfair Weather Friend?" And I said, "Yeah, me, Marla and I." He got up and he pushed his bar stool in, and he said, "That's it. I'm going home. I've been, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was like, I've been sitting at the bar for years with a fucking genius and had no idea." And I was like, Tony, sit your ass, like, whatever, dude, whatever, He wrote The Dance. And he is such a sweet man. And he just said, man, Ward, I heard that, I heard the Willie Merle cut on it. And he said, I had to pull my truck over. He said, what a beautiful song for them, and just what a moving message. And he says, just really beautiful. And Tony's such a great guy and such a sweet man. And I thanked him profusely, and he's a legendary human and a legendary songwriter. And then I got home that night, and he sent me an email. He had listened to the whole record, and he sent me an email, and it was so nice. I mean, I was 35 years old, but man, I was still a kid in this industry, a kid in this world. And to have somebody who had, written something so profound that meant so much to me growing up give me these compliments was just the best feeling, man. I needed it so much. But I remember one thing he said in the email, that he asked David Olney, who's a writer that passed away, performing on stage a few years ago. And he said, I asked Dave what he wanted out of this town, and Dave said, I want to cut a record. And what Tony took from that was that Dave wanted to do something and stick his flag in the ground and say, you know what, Nashville, I was here. And he said, with your album, Ward, you have done that. And that was still to this day probably the highest compliment I've ever received. That's the story of the song and the record and journey of 15 years in a 10-year town. I hope you enjoyed indulging whatever that was, but I'm going to send it off and clip it up. And if you want to check out warddavismusic.com or just the tour events on the Facebook and the Instagram. I don't know. I don't look at that much stuff, but there are buttons you can hit, and they'll talk about that shit. Ha. See? I'm going to write that down. All right. Peace out, everybody.